Okay, think about this. An AI system that doesn't just, solve the problems you give it, but one that actively figures out how to get better at solving problems.
Right.
It's like, it's not just doing its homework, it's also kind of rewriting its own textbook, improving its own study methods. That's the really fascinating area we're digging into today.
Exactly. We're looking at a specific research project, a system they call DGM, and it's tackling precisely this idea, an AI agent that can actually perform self-referential self-improvement.
Self-referential, okay.
Yeah, and the context they're using, the domain, is automated coding. So an AI learning to be a better programmer by changing its own code.
Okay, and our source for this is the technical paper that lays out this DGM system.
That's right. It's pretty detailed. It goes into the approach, the innovations, and why it's a step forward.
It definitely seems packed with insights into, well, a really novel way of looking at a classic AI challenge.
It is. It covers the theory, the experiments, the results, and gives some pretty compelling evidence that this way of doing things works.
So our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack all that, cut through some of the dense technical stuff, and pull out the core innovations, what makes DGM genuinely different and, well, important.
Right. We want to give you a clear grasp of what's driving this self-improvement so you can understand this development pretty quickly.
Okay, so let's set the stage. This idea of AI improving itself, it's not totally brand new in academic circles, is it? I feel like I've heard about earlier work.
No, you're right. People like Jürgen Schmidhuber were exploring theoretical models way back, thinking about these mathematically rigorous self-referential systems.
Right, the really theoretical side.
Exactly. And those early ideas often focused heavily on formal proofs, trying to design systems where any change the AI made to itself could be mathematically proven to be an improvement, or at least guaranteed not to break things catastrophically.
Which sounds great in theory, but
But the challenge, and it's a huge one, is that for the really complex systems we deal with now, like large language models, getting those formal proofs is just incredibly difficult.
impractical.
Often impossible, yeah. Unless you make really restrictive assumptions that kind of limit what the system can actually do.
Okay, give me an example, like an LLM coding agent.
Perfect example. You might think, okay, let's give this coding agent a new debugging tool. Intuitively, that seems like it should help, right?
Sure.
But proving that rigorously across all possible coding tasks, considering how the LLM might misuse the tool based on its training or how it interacts with the specific problem, the complexity just explodes. Formal proof becomes intractable.
So a real impact isn't theoretical, it's empirical. Does it actually work better in practice?
Precisely. It comes down to how the system actually performs. And this whole challenge ties into another really big idea in AI, something called open-endedness.
Open-endedness. Okay, what's that about?
The goal there is to create systems that don't just, solve one problem and stop. They should continuously generate novel things, new solutions, new problems even, and keep learning. Think sustained, unending exploration and discovery.
Like biological evolution, maybe. Or how science works.
Exactly like that. It's not just about solving problem X, but continuously getting better at finding and solving new kinds of problems, or finding fundamentally better ways to solve the old ones.
And that sounds hard. How do you explore such a vast space of possibilities?
That's the core difficulty. How do you search through, say, all possible AI designs or coding strategies in a way that keeps finding things that are genuinely interesting or useful and not just random noise?
Right.
People have tried different things. Quality diversity algorithms, goal-directed exploration, intrinsic motivation frameworks, trying to encourage exploration. But getting a system to improve its own ability to explore in that self-referential way, that's been a major frontier.
Okay, so the big challenge is moving past the need for proofs and finding a practical way to drive this open-ended discovery in really complex systems. And this is where DGM comes in with its innovations.
Exactly. The paper highlights two core innovations that really tackle these issues head on.
Let's hear them.
The first one directly addresses that proof problem. Instead of formal proofs, DGM uses empirical validation.
Okay, so testing it out.
Basically, yes, it tries a self-modification, it makes a change to its own code, its own internal workings, and then it simply evaluates whether that change actually improves its performance on a set benchmark of tasks, in this case, coding tasks.
So it's pragmatic, results driven.
Very much so. It's much closer to, say, biological evolution, where mutations are tested against the environment, or even how software engineers use A/B testing. Try a change, see if it does.
If it works better on the benchmark, keep it. Simple enough concept.
Conceptually simple, yes, though the implementation is clever. And the second big innovation, also inspired by evolution, is that it maintains an archive, a library, essentially, of all the different ancient versions it discovers along the way.
Wait, so it doesn't just keep the single best one it's found so far, it keeps all of them.
Not just the best one, no. And this is academically really important. Think about simple optimization, like hill climbing. You just keep tweaking the current best solution to make it slightly better.
Right. Seems logical.
But it's prone to getting stuck. You find a decent solution, but maybe not the best possible one because all the small steps nearby make things worse. A local optimum.
Ah, I see.
By keeping an archive of diverse agents, even ones that maybe didn't perform spectacularly when they were first created, DGM allows these past solutions to act as potential stepping stones.
Stepping stones. How so?
Well, a slightly lower performing agent might have some unique feature, maybe a different way of using a tool or a structural change. Later on, that unique feature might be compatible with a new idea discovered by another branch, leading to a huge jump in performance.
A jump that the simple hill climber would have missed because it threw away that less good ancestor.
Precisely. It's about building a diverse pool of genetic material, if you will, that future generations can draw on. Not just climbing the current peak. It's like keeping a record of all your R&D experiments, even the ones that didn't immediately pan out.
That makes a lot of sense. It's exploring the landscape more broadly.
Exactly. And the paper talks about how this creates a closed loop for self-improvement. In many systems, getting better at a task doesn't necessarily make the system better at the process of improvement itself.
Okay.
DGM is designed so that success on the coding benchmarks directly reflects how good its last self-modification was. Improvement in coding ability feeds back into improving the ability to make further improvements.
Ah, so it learns how to learn better, essentially.
It's a recursive process. Success breeds better modification strategies, which breeds more success, potentially leading to compounding, self-accelerating progress. That's a really exciting academic goal.
That really hits the self-referential part home. It's improving its own improvement engine.
That's the core idea. And just to contrast this quickly, many AI agents built on foundation models are either painstakingly handcrafted by humans,
Lots of trial and error, I
a
imagine.
huge amount, or they might use a separate fixed meta agent.
A meta agent.
Yeah, like a second AI whose only job is to optimize the first AI that's actually doing the task, like coding. But that meta agent is often also handcrafted and doesn't necessarily improve how it optimizes.
So it's a fixed supervisor.
Right. What's really innovative and different about DGM is that it's a single system. The same agent solving the coding problems is also the one proposing and implementing changes to its own code, its own prompts, its own tools.
No external meta agent needed.
Exactly. It enables truly self-referential refinement. The system is automating the process of its own design and optimization. It's automating the ingenuity, which is the academic leap here.
Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts then. How does DGM actually do this? Walk me through the cycle.
Okay. It starts conceptually with just one initial coding agent. Its abilities are all defined by its codebase Python scripts containing its logic, the prompts it uses to talk to the underlying foundation models, which are frozen, by the way, not changing, and definitions for any tools it can use.
And the key is that self-improvement is treated as just another coding task.
Precisely. The agent gets better by writing code that modifies its own source files. That's the self-referential bit in action.
Mind-bending. So how does the cycle work with that archive?
Right, so the system maintains this growing archive of all discovered agents. In each iteration, it selects one or more parent agents from the archive.
How does it choose? Just the best ones.
Not just the best performers. The selection criteria is interesting. It balances current performance with other factors, like how many successful child agents a parent has produced in the past, a measure of like evolutionary potential.
So it values parents that are good at making viable offspring, not just good at the task themselves.
Yeah, it's a richer notion of fitness. Then, the selected parent agent does something cool. It analyzes its own performance logs from previous runs on the coding benchmarks.
It studies its past failures and successes.
Exactly. Based on that analysis, it formulates a proposal in natural language for a feature or an improvement it thinks should be made to itself. Like, I should handle long contexts better, or I need a more precise way to edit code.
And then,
That proposal becomes the task description. The agent's job is now to act on that proposal to write the code changes needed to modify its own code base to implement the suggested feature.
it's diagnosing its own shortcomings and then acting as its own software engineer. That's amazing.
It really is. This self-modification creates a new agent, the offspring. This new agent gets evaluated on the benchmarks.
And does it get added to the archive?
Only if it meets strict criteria. It has to compile successfully, obviously. And crucially, it must still retain the core ability to edit code. It can't break its own self-improvement mechanism.
Ah, so it has to remain viable for future evolution.
Exactly. Agents that fail these checks are just discarded. This cycle repeats, constantly adding new, viable, potentially diverse agents to the archive.
And the paper has that visualization, the archive tree. Figure 3 left, I think, shows it branching out.
Yes, that treat is fantastic for understanding the impact of the archive and the open-ended search. You see nodes representing agents, color-coded by performance, linked by lineage.
And it's not just a straight line upwards in performance, is it?
No, and that's the critical insight. You see branches where performance actually dips lighter colored nodes, but then later an agent on that same branch achieves a major breakthrough, maybe jumping to a much darker color.
Like node 24 they mentioned.
Node 24 is a perfect example. It emerged from a lineage that took a temporary performance hit. This visually proves the stepping stone idea. The system explores paths that aren't immediately optimal, finding sequences of changes that unlock much higher performance later on, something a greedy hill climber just wouldn't find.
That's really compelling visual evidence for the whole open-ended approach being necessary. Okay, let's make this concrete. What kinds of actual code changes did DGM discover for itself?
Yeah, the paper gives some great specific examples. These really show the self-improvement loop working at the code level. One early one was adding a function called isPatchValid. That's in diff1.
What did that do? Sounds like a check.
It was basically a self-correction. The agent figured out it sometimes generated code changes, like patches, that accidentally targeted the wrong files, maybe test files instead of source files, or were just malformed. So it built this check to validate its own proposed changes before trying to apply them.
Smart. Adding a sanity check for its own output.
Exactly. Another really significant thing it learned was how to generate and evaluate multiple potential solutions for a single problem. It added parameters like max trees and num candidates to its own configuration and logic. Diff 1 and 3 show parts of this.
So instead of just one shot, it could try a few things.
Right, it could explore several different ways to fix a bug or add a feature internally, evaluate them, and then pick the best one, like internal brainstorming before committing.
That seems way more robust.
It is. It also developed a function called summarize messages, shown in diff 2. This was a very practical adaptation.
For what? Context limits?
Exactly. Large language models have limits on how much text they can process at once, the context window. The agent learned that for complex problems with long histories, it needed to summarize the older parts of the conversation to avoid hitting those limits. It adapted its own process to work around the limitations of its underlying tools.
Clever. What else?
It got much better at analyzing the results from the coding benchmarks. It introduced a more structured way to handle feedback using a solution attempt data structure and really enhanced its analytics results function. That's diff 4 and 5.
So it could learn more from failures.
Much more, not just pass-fail, but extracting specific error messages, identifying which tests failed, calculating pass rates, and even generating recommendations for what to try differently on the next attempt. It made the feedback loop much richer and more informative.
It essentially learned to be a better debugger for itself.
Fundamentally, yeah. And it didn't just improve its logic, it improved its tools. It made several upgrades to its internal editor tool for modifying code. Diff 6, 7, 8 show this.
How so?
Instead of just basic file editing, it added more fine-grained capabilities. Things like view range to look at specific line numbers, straight place for doing precise find and replace operations within a file, and insert for adding text at a specific line.
So it built itself better surgical instruments for coding.
It's a great way to put it. And the straight place function is a prime example highlighted in the paper. The DGM system itself proposed the idea, hey, my current edit command is crude, I should implement a more precise straight place command. And then it wrote the code in its own tool library to add that function.
Wow, that's the entire loop right there, identifying a need, proposing a solution, and implementing it in its own codebase.
Exactly. These aren't just abstract improvements. They are concrete code changes, discovered and implemented by the agent itself, making it functionally better. It really underscores the academic point about automating the discovery of these kinds of implementation details.
Okay, so the DGM can definitely modify itself in sophisticated ways. That seems clear. But the big question is, did all this self-improvement actually make it objectively better at solving coding problems? Did the benchmarks show improvement?
Yes, significantly so. The experiments really back this up. They tested it on two standard coding benchmarks. First, SWE-bench, which is quite realistic. It uses actual bug-fixing tasks from real GitHub repositories.
Okay, real-world problems.
Right. And second, Polyglot, which is interesting because it covers multiple programming languages and is designed to be less likely to overlap heavily with the LLM's training data. They also compare against Aider, a known coding agent, on Polyglot.
And how did they measure success?
They used a pretty tough metric called Pass It 1. That means the agent has to generate the correct solution on its very first attempt without getting any feedback from failed tests and iterating. It's harder than, say, Pass It K, where it gets multiple tries.
So a strong test of its initial problem-solving capability. What were the results?
The headline results, which you can see summarized nicely in Figure 2 in the paper, show that the full DGM system consistently and significantly outperformed baseline versions,
Baselines like what?
like versions that had the self-improvement mechanism but lacked the open-ended exploration provided by the archive, or versions that had the archive but used a fixed, non-improving strategy.
Ah, so isolating the components.
Exactly. And the results clearly show that both the self-improvement and the open-ended exploration via the archive are crucial. You needed both together to get the big performance gains. Removing either one hurt performance substantially.
So the combination is the key innovation here, empirically validated. How did it compare to, agents built the old-fashioned way by humans?
This is where it gets really interesting. Through this automated self-improvement, DGM discovered agents that were competitive with, or even better than, existing handcrafted agents. On SWE-bench, its final agent achieved performance comparable to the open-source state-of-the-art at the time.
Wow.
And on Polyglot, starting from a fairly basic initial agent, it evolved over time to significantly outperform Aider, which is a well-regarded tool that's had considerable human development effort put into it.
That's pretty remarkable, an automated evolutionary process catching up to or beating dedicated human engineering effort.
It really demonstrates the potential power of automating the discovery of effective agent designs and strategies, not just the execution. And those progress plots, like Figure 3 Right and others in the appendix, they tell a fascinating story too.
How so?
Well, they show the performance of the best agent found so far generally increasing over the iterations, as you'd expect. But the really crucial plot is the one that traces the performance only along the specific lineage that led to the final best agent.
Ah, following the direct ancestors.
Right. And on that plot, you often see dips in performance, temporary setbacks.
The stepping stones again.
Exactly. It empirically shows the system wasn't just taking the steepest path uphill. The open-ended search, using the archive, allowed it to explore these seemingly suboptimal intermediate stages, the dips, because they were necessary stepping stones to ultimately reach much higher performance peaks later on. It confirms the academic hypothesis about why open-ended search beats simple hill climbing in these complex spaces.
That makes the whole concept feel very tangible. Okay, let's zoom out. Looking ahead, what are the really big implications here, and what are the limitations or challenges still?
Well, the potential is frankly enormous. This kind of work hints at a future where a lot of the ingenuity and painstaking effort that human developers currently pour into designing, building, and refining complex AI systems could potentially be automated.
AI designing AI.
In a sense, yes. DGM shows a plausible path towards AI systems that evolve their own architectures, their own tools, their own logic through these iterative self-improvement cycles that could dramatically accelerate the pace of AI development itself.
That's a profound shift, from AI as a tool to AI as a partner in its own creation. But what about safety? Does an AI improving itself raise red flags?
It's the critical question, absolutely. The paper is careful to note that in their experiments they observed no harmful or malicious behavior. The self-modification stayed focused on improving coding ability, which was the benchmark task.
Okay, good.
But more broadly, they raise a really interesting point. Could this self-improvement paradigm actually be directed towards enhancing safety and interpretability?
How would that even work?
Theoretically, you could design the evaluation function, the benchmark, to reward agents not just for performance, but also for discovering and integrating safety mechanisms, or for modifying themselves to be more transparent or explainable.
So evolve towards safety.
It's a challenging path for sure, like how do you precisely define and measure safety or interpretability in a benchmark? But the core idea is that the self-improvement capability itself isn't inherently good or bad. It's a powerful mechanism that could potentially be harnessed to build more robust and trustworthy AI. Maybe integrating principles like constitutional AI, where the model is guided by a set of rules.
So the system could maybe learn to build its own guardrails?
That's the ambitious long-term vision, directing the evolutionary pressure towards desirable properties, but it's complex, requires a lot more research.
Definitely. What about other limitations right now?
Well, as impressive as DGM is, it's not necessarily outperforming the absolute best closed-source, heavily engineered systems yet. It also takes a lot of computation.
Expensive to run.
Very. The paper mentions a single long run can take weeks on significant hardware, incurring substantial costs. That's a practical barrier for many researchers or for rapid iteration right now.
So powerful, but resource hungry.
Right, and its capabilities are ultimately capped by the underlying foundation models it uses, which were kept frozen in these experiments. A huge next step would be exploring if the self-improvement could extend to modifying the foundation model itself, not just the agent code around it.
Ah, opening up the core model to evolution too.
Exactly. Plus, extending this beyond coding to other complex domains and maybe even making the exploration process itself self-modifiable. Those are all really exciting academic frontiers.
Okay, so wrapping this up, DGM feels like a really fundamental step towards truly self-improving AI. It cleverly sidesteps the need for impossible formal proofs by using. Okay, think about this. An AI system that doesn't just,